Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Hello and Shalom Aleichem. Welcome back to today's Daf Hayomi, Meseches CHULLIN Daf Lamed Zayin. We are holding at the Mishnah, which is 3 lines off the top. Says the Mishnah, Sheichet es ha-mesukenes. If one chooses to shecht a mesukenes animal, mesukenes is an animal on the verge of death. So he's going to quickly seize the opportunity before the animal dies and turns into an avela. He's going to try to shecht it to make it consumable, to make it kosher. Now, how do you define the mesukenes stage? The Gemara later will discuss this in detail. So an animal is weak, it's ill, about to die, and he does a quick shechita. So you would think it's okay, what's the problem? But as Rashi explains, there's a concern that perhaps the animal, due to its extreme weakness, might expire before the shechita concludes, in which case, since it didn't experience a full shechita, it's an avela. So how do you determine? How do you confirm that the animal actually survived the shechita process and its life was only terminated by the actual shechita and not just died of natural causes? So you need some sort of indication, a siman, a strong sign of life, which was expressed during the shechita to indicate that the life force, the level of chiyus in the behemoth was still very strongly there. In which case it experienced a proper shechita, and the shechita, the act of shechita, is what terminated its life, in which case it's kosher. So what's a strong sign of life? We have 3 opinions. Rabban Shimon Gamliel, Omer, some changes to Rabban Gamliel. That's the first opinion. Omer, he says, Asha tefarches, it has to quiver, has to shake. Beyadu b'regel, its hand and its foot. So if this happens, that's an indication of a strong level of life, of chiyus that was present, in which case we can assume that it was alive until the end of the shechita, and the shechita was a valid one. Lazo Omer, he says you don't need such a grand presentation. Lazo Omer, dayim zinka, it's enough if you noted that the blood was oozing out with force, indicating that in fact there was sufficient life during the shechita. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so picking up on this thread, says Rabbi Shimon, suppose you weren't able to notice the flow of blood. It was dark, it was at night. Hashechet balayla. Ulamacha, the next morning, Hishkim, he gets up, umatzab kesalim leim dam, he sees the walls. Rashi explains the walls here are not the actual walls of the house. Talking about the walls of the base of shechita, meaning near the place of shechita, the neck. Malayin dam, full of blood, which indicates that there was an oozing, kshera. Once again, that's adequate and the animal's kosher. Why? Because this is proof that there was oozing, shazinka. Ukemidash Rabbi Eliezer, and this in fact follows Rabbi Eliezer's shita, that this indication is enough. Okay, we have 2 shitas so far. Rabbi Gamliel, you need pirchas biyadu b'regel, shaking of hand and foot. Rabbi Eliezer says zinka, oozing of blood. Here comes the 3rd shita. V'chacham oimrim, Asha tefarches oy biyad oy b'regel. You don't need hand and foot to experience pirchas. One or the other is enough. Okay, so if the animal moves its hand or its foot, that's enough. Oy, another option is Asha tekashkesh biznava. It wiggled its tail. Echad behema daka, v'echad behema gasa. So this applies to both types of animals. The lighter animals, like a goat, a sheep, or a behema gasa, a heavy animal, cattle. Now, but there are differences. Behema daka shepashta yada v'lo yechzira psula. If the behema daka was observed extending his hand during the shechita without retracting it, psula, that's not adequate sign of life. Why? It's just an expression of the expiry of the animal, but it isn't a sign of real life. So, in contrast to Behema Gas, we're even extending just one way. Motion is enough, is adequate expression of life. Hemudaka is just a reflex of action. It's not going to be sufficient. Now, all these requirements are only once the animal has been established as ill, as weak. So you need this indicator to indicate the presence of sufficient life. When does this all apply? The animal was established as a mesukenes. So since it's sort of teetering, you need these simanim to mashal the animal. If the animal is known to be okay, well, fully healthy, in that case, there's no reason to suspect anything. Even if the animal does not express any of these indicators, it just dies quietly. It's okay, it's kshera, because we have all the reason to believe that the animal is full of life, and there's nothing wrong with the shechita. Okay, so in a nutshell, a behem which is defined as a mesukenes, which will be explained later, must exhibit some signs of life during the shechita to indicate that the animal actually survived until the end of shechita and was actually shechted. We have 3 shitas. Pirchas biyad beregel. That's from Gamliel. Chacham say yad oy beregel. Rav Lezer adds, zinka is enough. The shooting, the oozing of the dam is enough of expression of life, and that's enough. Says the Gemara, hold it. You're assuming that an animal who's experiencing such extreme weakness prior to shechita is going to be kosher if shechted properly? Who's to say? Perhaps once the animal's on the verge of death, it's like half dead. It's like an avela. Mesukenes mimay disharya. How do we even know that a mesukenes is permitted if it experienced a proper shechita? That's the question. Responds the Gemara, let me ask you, and why would you say it's aser? What is your basis for assuming otherwise? Why would you even suggest that it's aser? You have no pasuk to, indicate such. Well, the pasuk does say zois hachaya asher toichli, and this can be learned as chaya, full of life. Only an animal which is full of life that could be eaten by way of shechita. Chaya, a fully healthy, normal animal, echol, that could be eaten through shechita, but b'she'ena chaya. If an animal is not fully alive, it's on the verge, perhaps lo yisoichal, you can't eat it. So it's an inference from a mitzvah aseh. It's called a lav habo mechlal aseh. The Torah states something positive with an inference to the contrary, such as over here. If it's chaya, eat it, which means if otherwise don't. That's called a lav habo mechlal aseh. So that's called an aseh, which means to say that if one eats it, he has violated an aseh. Okay, so this animal which is deemed mesukenes, eina chaya. It's not really chaya because it's not going to live too much longer. It's on the verge of death. So perhaps it's aser. That's the question. So how do we know otherwise? Well, it says the Gemara, I'll prove to you that really a mesukenes is okay. Why? Since the Gemara warns against the pasuk warns against eating a dead animal carcass and a vela. What does that tell you about a mesukenes? It's okay, machlal, that infers that mesukenes is okay, it's sharia. Because otherwise, once the mesukenes, which is merely on the verge, is asr, then of course once it dies, it's asr. Right? So what does the Torah have to say? Nevela is asr. These are gadadach. People are going to tell me, even a mesukenes who's on the verge of death is already asir, is already forbidden. So then, obviously, a nevela who died, of course, is asr. Why even mention that? If this very animal is asr even during its lifetime because it's about to die, why even mention? It goes without saying, obviously, that once it's dead, it can't eat it. So that proves to us that in fact mesukenes is okay, and only after death, where it's a real nevela, then it's asr. No, says the one, perhaps you can say, Hainu nevela, Hainu mesukenes. Actually, the word nevela can be translated as musukenes. So perhaps Rashi explains that the term nevela applies already during its lifetime, when it's on the verge of death, when it's slated to die. And on that, the Torah says, don't eat it because it's nevela. So now you have two isurim. One is the mitzvah sasei zeis hachaya, and one is don't eat a nevela. Nevela seicha. So again, perhaps Abasukenes is really asr. You can't say that. That's not really an option. Why? The Chsiv, the pasuk says, an nevela only happens after death. So you can't say it was there during its lifetime. The Chsiv, v'chi yamas min ha-behema. When the animal dies, right? Asher hilachem la'achla, and I gave an nevlasa. Now it's called a nevela. Only lachar misa, after death, who the cry Rachman nevela. The term nevela only applies after death, and only after death. Menchaim during its lifetime, despite being on the verge, no, lo yikru nevela, it's not called a nevela. So again, that proves our point that a musukenes is mutter. Right? Because otherwise, meaning if it's already asr when it's on the verge, and of course it's asr after death, why add that point? Why discuss an nevela if it's already asr? Says the Gemara, no, I'll tell you why. Maybe it's really asr to a certain extent during its lifetime, because of that mitzvah sasei, zeis hachaya, and that gets exacerbated when it dies. There's another layer of isser that applies later, nevela. It's the very same animal. When it's a musukenes, only on the verge of death, has a limited isser, and that gets multiplied after its death. It gets deeper, another layer, because of its nevela status. Okay, v'dilma, perhaps I can tell you, hainu nevela, hainu musukenes. Really, a nevela can be going on an animal that was already musukenes during its lifetime. But during the lifetime of the animal, there's only a limited isser asay. And after death, more isser lands on it. It becomes a nevela as well. It's just that mechaim during its lifetime, when it's merely on the verge, there's a limited prohibition. It's only an asay, but asay lachar after it dies, but lav comes upon it as well. So again, how do you know otherwise? You're right. We can't really prove from here. We're going to shift gears and try to prove it from a different halach. The fact that Torah warns against eating a treifa. Rashi explains your typical treifa is an animal who has an internal wound, punctured membrane, brain membrane, missing a lung, a punctured lung, right? All these types of wounds. Don't eat it. Treifa le'seich. So what does that tell you? About a musukenes mechlal, the musukenes shari. Apparently musukenes is okay. Why? These are gadaitach musukenes asir, because if a musukenes is asir, so once that's asir, of course a treifa is asir. It goes without saying. And that's redundant, right? Hashta musukenes. Look, even a musukenes, which is not missing any limbs. I mean, it's a complete animal. It's just an extremely ill or weak animal. It's not really missing anything. Not like a treifa that's missing some. Still, we're saying it's asir, it's forbidden. Treifa maboy, of course, a treifa, which is missing a piece, it's missing a limb, it's wounded, it's punctured, right? Of course, it's asir maboy, it goes without saying. So again, that proves to us that musukenes is okay, because otherwise, look, a musukenes can't live, and a treifa can't live. And if a musukenes is already also, despite the fact that it's not really wounded or missing anything critical in the animal, certainly a treifa, which is even worse, in a worse shape than a mesukenes. Of course it's asa. Why does the Torah bother saying treifa is asa? Oh, apparently because the mesukenes is really mutter. Unlike your suggestion. And only a treifa, which is really wounded or injured, that's asa. Well, who says? Vidilma, perhaps. Pretty much like a repetition of the previous Gemara. Just over there we spoke about Nevela, we were talking about treifa. Vidilma, perhaps hainu treifa on mesukenes. Perhaps just the opposite. Even in mesukenes, on the verge of death, is already classified as treifa. Rashi explains that the term treifa, according to this stage in the Gemara, according to this suggestion, just means an animal on the verge. Kroi valamas. An animal that's not going to survive. Hainu treifa hainu mesukenes. V'laver olav v'asei v'leisas. And Torah is just adding, in addition to the zois hachaya pasuk, that is a mitzvah hasei violation upon eating the mesukenes, there's also a leis hasei. Okay, so again, perhaps we're back to that suggestion that it really a mesukenes is usher on account of being a mesukenes. That's the hasei of zois hachaya, and also it's called a treifa. Says the Gemara in Cain. If that were the case, here comes a question. Nevela de kos rachman alamali. So why does the Torah even bother informing us that a nevela, meaning an animal that dies, is called a nevela, you can't eat it? Why bother saying that? Lamali. Look, even during its lifetime, when it's merely on the verge, you already have an asay and a leis asay. Of course, once it dies, right? Lamali, umam achayim. Even during its lifetime, when it's merely on the verge, when you're expecting death, koyala balav v'asay, there's a lav and asay. Asay is a sachai, the lav is a treifa le'seichel. Achamisim, but of course, after it dies, it's asr. Well, says the Gemara, no. Maybe the point of the pasuk is just to add a third isser. V'dil ma'ayna nevei, line of treifa, perhaps. We're talking about the same animal. It's going in this very case, and just coming to add another layer of Isra. It's all one in the same family. So the animal on the verge is called a mesukenes, it's called a treif. There's an asay and lois asay. And when it dies, another layer of Isra lands on it, the Isra nevela. To give you a total of 3, a full package of prohibitions. Zois hachaya because of mesukenes, treifa le'seichel because of mesukenes, and now once it dies, nevela le'seichel. So back to our suggestion, perhaps mesukenes is really asr. El mihacha, here is the proof that it's not. V'chelu nevela v'chelu treifa yasel chamalacha v'achal le'seichlu. The pasuk is saying, look, the chelav, the fats, they can be used for production, for manufacturing. They're not metame, but don't eat it. The isra of eating a chelav isn't just by a regular animal. Even a chelav of a nevela or a treif is also asr. And the obvious question is, isn't it obvious? I mean, chelav is asr. Why would I think this is different? We explained on this. What's the added point in this pasuk? Why are we stressing that it's asr? Amra Torah is telling us, Yaver isur nevela v'yachal isur chelav. So this chelav had a pre-existing isur because it's chelav. Now that it turned to nevela, another layer of isur adds on it. Gets added to the previous isur. And now one eats it, he's violated 2 isur, chelav and nevela. Likewise, v'yaver isur treifa v'yachal isur chelav. If it's a treifa, the chelav now gets 2 layers of isur. The pre-existing isur because of chelav, and now because it became a treifa. And we don't say, look, we can't pile one is on the other. That's the point of the pasuk. Okay. Having said that, we turn to the base. This is going to be proving our point. So the question is, why does the Torah have to itemize it like this? You should know that the Isra of nevela lands on the Isra of chelav. The Isra of treifa lands on the Isra of chelav. Why this repetition? Just say one and we know the other. Why? Once we know that if we say that the animal on the verge of death is asur on account of treifa, it's classified as a treifa. Treifa anum sukenes. So look, treifa is merely on the verge of death. It's not dead yet. And still the Torah says, look, the Isra treifa lands on the Isra chelev. Now let's picture it. The animal now dies. Isn't it obvious that the extra Isra of nevela will come and land on that chelev? Look, even the Isra treifa, which is merely due to the anticipation, the expectation of death, that comes and adds another layer of Isra on the chelev. Certainly death itself. If the process leading into death has this effect, certainly death itself. So it's obvious that the Isra of nevela will come and land on the Isra chelev. It's already sort of been indicated in the pasuk. Why this repetition? Again, if an animal which is considered musukenes is already asur on account of treifa, that triggers a question. Lichter Rachman, the pasuk should simply state like this: Chelev nevela yosel chamaloch. Okay, you can use the chelev, whatever you need. That's one point. There's no concerns about tumah. And then simply state v'chelev treifa leisechlu. One may not eat chelev of a treifa, meaning that the extra treifa prohibition gets added on top of the old Isra of chelev for a total of 2 Isur. And now I automatically know. Certainly if the animal dies and achieves nevela status, of course that Isur will add another layer as well. But I mean, I'll figure it out on my own. Uma michayim, if even during the lifetime of the animal, when it was a musukenes, when it was classified as an Isur treifa, according to our suggestion, because it was on the verge of death. So merely on the verge is already sufficient. Asur Isur treifa, the Isur treifa comes and lands and gets added chayil. Isur chelev on the Isur chelev. Certainly lachamism, but of course, once it dies, once it experiences actual death, of course, that nevela status will come and be added to the equation. Oh, element the kasar rachmana nevela. Rather, the very fact that the pasuk has to single out that the Isra nevela is a player upon the chelev. Michlal, that teaches us that treifa lav haynu musukenes. And the answer is no. That an animal on the verge of death is not a treifa. It's only musukenes, which is not asur, on account of. So, in this case, there was no Isser added to the chelev. A real treifa which has an internal wound, yeah, that's a treifa. On that the pasuk says, don't eat that chelev, because it's chelev and also because it's treifa. But an animal which isn't technically a treifa, it's not missing any limbs, or it's just musukenes, on the verge of death. There is no Isser at that point. Only once it dies. It's classified as nevela. Oh, now it becomes asur. On this the Torah says, by the way, Isra nevela comes and lands on the Isra chelev to make it doubly asur. So again, this points to us. This proves to us that a musukenes is not really asur. Maskav Ravash, I have a question on this conclusion. Vaduma, perhaps no. Lo'ilam emelach, perhaps I can still insist. Haynu treifa, haynu musukenes. Even a musukenes is also classified as a treifa and it's asur. As per your question, or the commerce regarding your question, if so, that the animal on the verge of death is already considered a treifa and is already asur on account of that reason, in which case the chelev already got that extra layer of isur. So if so, why does the Torah have to go out of its way and tell you, once it dies, it's nevela, the chelev is asur for that reason as well? Well, if on the verge is asur, certainly once it experienced death, it would be asur. The Gamras, as per your question, nevela, the kasar rachman, why does the Torah have to point out the Isra Nevela on the Chaylev. Because once it underwent this transitional period, this pre-death, this verge of death stage, which triggers an Isra of Treifa/Mesukenes, of course death itself will have the same effect. The answer is, could you think of a case of an animal that died, a behemoth that was mesa without transitioning, without going through this in-between stage? It went straight from full life to absolute death. It was killed. It was cut in half. So for that case where the animal never experienced that intermediary stage, that in-between status, it just died straight out. Unless the Torah has to say, well, guess what? The Isra Nevela just arrived, lands on the Chaylev. So your question is valid, but there's a case where it went straight, shortcut from life to death directly. And for that, Torah has to say, well, guess what? Isra Nevela is Chal on Isra Chaylev. As per your question, Lach Nevela, it's referring to a very specific Nevela, which never experienced that verge of death. What's the example? Shasa Gistri, cut it in half. Well, some Nami there as well, it's impossible to have Musukenes Porta, that it hadn't experienced even a minute moment of Musukenes status. Mekamed Lifsak Laruba, before the the majority was cut through, was sliced. So inevitably did experience some transitional stage, in which case it was stamped as a Musukenes, and if Musukenes is Asr, and obviously the next stage would be Asr as well, which makes the pasuk redundant, which proves our point that in fact an animal on the verge of death is not Asr. Okay, there goes our proof. Okay, so the Gemara started with the question, how do we even know Musukenes is okay? Mishnah says Musukenes is okay, provided it exhibits signs of life during the Shechita. How do we even know Musukenes is okay? Perhaps half dead is like an... We proved it from this pasuk. We might say another araya to this point, in Cain. If so, that the animal on the verge, the animal that's Musukenes is Asr, lei mochelo and velo v'treifa. The Torah would refer to the Isser, Nevela, and Treifa that lands on the Chaylev, but just say it in short form, Chaylev, Nevela, Treifa, without expressing the word Chaylev twice. Why does the pasuk have to say Chaylev Nevela, Chaylev Treifa, Chaylev, why the extra words? To teach us something. That Why mention the word Chaylev again, right? Next to the word Treifa, to teach us that only a real Treifa, who's missing that lung, only that real Treifa is completely Asr. Zui, this type of animal, this type of injury generates an Isser, a complete comprehensive Isser on the entire animal. There's no differentiation between the chaylev and the basar. The entire animal is asr. It's a treifa. But there's a different type of animal, which is very similar but very different, where the flesh is mutter, a musukenes. You can eat it. The chaylev is asr, but the flesh is okay. So there's a strong differentiation between the chaylev and the basar in that case. We have a different type. The status of the chaylev is different than the basar. Although chaylev is asr, but the basar is mutter be'ezoi. So which one is that? Zumusukenes. That's our good friend, the musukenes, which is really mutter. Here comes a third proof that it's mutter mehachva. Pasuk in Yecheskel, after Hashem instructs him to eat this, speaks to him about involvement in impurities, and he says, "No, Hashem, I'm totally clean, I'm pure." I was always careful from interacting with tumah. From way back, I never ingested nevelo treifa until today. I never ate b'sar pigel. To be explained in a minute. So Yechezkel is presenting that he kept away from all these types of problematic materials, questionable materials. Let's break them down phrase by phrase. Hine nafshlo mitumo. I steered clear of impurities. What does that mean? Even in terms of what's going on in my mind. I maintain purity, I maintain clarity. I would refrain from engaging in improper thoughts during daytime, which can generate impurity during nighttime through emissions. Number two, I never ate vela treifa. Now obviously, that's straight plain usr. Why is he highlighting that? Even questionable animals I wouldn't eat. I never ate meat from an animal that was shechted in a hurry because it was on the verge of death. Our good friend the Mesukenes. Shech. Quickly, get the knife, shecht before it dies. I kept away from that. There was an element of impropriety, element of lack of life, of nevela, even though technically, halachically it's okay, but I kept away. He was machmer, I kept higher standards. I never ate b'sar pigel, which means in this case, pigel, as we know, is connected to the mindset of the person doing the avodah and the carbon, right? He's thinking improper, planning, makes it pigel. So by extension, I wouldn't eat behema shahir b'chacham, an animal which had some sort of question on a halacha, which was taken to the Rav to rule on it. Even that I kept away from. An animal that was analyzed and contemplated upon. Mishum b'nasan amru. He has a different shot in this last one. So Rashi explains this, despite Yechezkel being a kohen, in which case he's exempt from separating the matanes of the animal, the zroya, the forearm, the chayim, the cheek area, the cave, the stomach, which is typically given to a kohen. In this case he was exempt, but he was machmir. He wouldn't eat from a behema whose matanes were not separated and give it to the kohen. Okay, so let's just go back for a second. He kept away from basar kois, from the quickly shechted animal. And it's being highlighted as a chumrah, as something special. What does that tell you about the plain halacha on that animal? Obviously, it's okay. Obviously, it's acceptable. Certainly, this works if it's sharia, if it's technically okay. If Mesukenes is moteres, that's a true expression of the higher standards that Yechezkel maintained. He kept away despite the fact that it was okay in halacha. Eli amras asira, but if you're going to tell me Mesukenes is halachically forbidden, so what's the big deal that he kept away from it? It's forbidden. My Ravu say the Yechezkel. What's the big deal that Yechezkel didn't eat it? So again, that proves our point that Mesukenes is mutter. It brings a total rayas to 3. You have 3 rayas, then in fact it's mutter. Okay, one more last point. What exactly is a Mesukenes? What defines the Mesukenes stage? Echidami Mesukenes. It must be an animal that is exhibiting extreme weakness. Try to get it up, get it to stand, and it can't stand on its own. On its own, he adds, this is regarded as Mesukenes, even though he has strong teeth and he's chewing through blocks of wood. That's irrelevant. The fact is, the animal is in extreme state of weakness. It's a Mesukenes. He adds, even he's chewing through beams. Besura masnihachi, so the aforementioned version was presented in Surah, but Medisa masnihachi, this is a different version of this discussion. How do you define a Mesukenes? Rav, it's Rav himself elaborated more than earlier. The animal can't you can't stand it up. And he added this point as well. So earlier, this part was quoted from Chanina. According to this version, Rav Yudam Rav himself continues on. He says, even though he's been observed chewing through blocks of wood, that doesn't really mitigate his situation. Rami Bar Yechezkel, even if he's chewing beams, and Rashi says it's not really machlokes, he's just presenting a different illustration. Okay, so bottom line is, a Mesukenes who was extremely weak, can't keep up his own weight, is technically okay. But in order to preempt any concerns that the animal perhaps died mid-shchita, did not really experience a full shchita, the animal is only mutar if it exhibited signs of life, strong signs of life, significant signs of life, which is listed out in the Mishnah. According to those three opinions, one sheet is pirchas biyad b'regel, one sheet says just yad or regel, or kishkish biznava, according to the other sheet, zinka, exuding of blood with a force, a sufficient sign of life to permit the animal. All the best to you and hatzlacha.